Tattoos can tell you a lot about a person. Designs can reveal a person's likes and interests, their taste in art, the quotes or people that are meaningful to them. In tragic circumstances, they can be used to identify a body, but they don't usually identify a person's killer. In May 2019, Indonesia was shaken by a case that horrified the nation. Human remains were discovered inside one of the largest traditional markets in East Java. A woman's body had been cut into pieces, and on the victim's feet were words, a name, and a sentence referencing a church. The name was not hers, it was his. This is the Pasar Besar Malang murder and mutilation case. On Tuesday, May 14th, 2019, at around 1:30 in the afternoon, a merchant named Samsul Arifin was going about his day on the second floor of the traditional Indonesian market, Pasar Besar Malang. Unlike the kind of small weekend farmers market that you might picture, Indonesian traditional markets are enormous, permanent, multi-story commercial complexes where hundreds of vendors sell everything from fresh vegetables and meat to clothing and household goods. Open every day from the early hours of the morning, Pasar Besar is one of the largest of its kind in the city of Malang, drawing thousands of shoppers daily. For Samsul, it was just another day at work, but there was something bothering him that afternoon. A smell, putrid, unmistakable. He assumed it was a dead rat and reported it to a security officer. The two of them tracked down the source together, and what they found was not a rat. Tucked beneath the market stairs were the arms and legs of a human body. From the torso, which was found in a bathroom, investigators could determine the victim was a woman. Duct tape had been placed over her genitalia. Her head was found separately, wrapped inside a black plastic bag. The police were called immediately. The scene was grim, but seasoned investigators had seen violent crimes before. But what made even the most experienced officers pause was something on the victim's feet, writing on both soles. On one foot, a sentence in Indonesian read, "The revelation I received from the Chomboran church with a family I met." On the other, a single name, Sugeng. At first, investigators assumed the writing had been done with a pen, but no matter how hard they tried to wash it off, the ink wouldn't budge, wouldn't smudge. Only then did they realize it wasn't scribbled on. It was a tattoo. These bizarre words had been deliberately, carefully carved into her skin. A nationwide search began almost instantly. Within a day, the name led investigators to a real person. There isn't much documented about Sugeng Santoso online, and what little is known about him paints a picture of a man living on the margins of society. He was 49 years old at the time of his arrest, a middle-aged man who had long since drifted away from any stable life. He had previously rented a small, cheap room in the Jodipan neighborhood of Malang, but had ended up homeless. Locals there already knew who he was. It was hard not to. He was erratic, muttering things to himself that no one around him could understand, disconnected from the people and the world around him. By the time of the incident, he was a familiar fixture around the traditional markets of Malang. He helped with parking. He carried groceries for shoppers. He slept in front of closed market stalls at night. To most people, he was just a consistent part of the scenery of the markets. There is not much known about his educational background, but the way he wrote in Indonesian had little grammatical structure and was not always coherent. And those around him believed that he'd had a limited education. Beyond that, they felt he lacked the ability to think and reason the way other people his age did, suggesting a possible cognitive disability that went beyond mental illness. Sugeng had left his old room, but his belongings were not immediately cleared out. During their investigation, the police visited and found 4 handwritten sheets of paper covered in Javanese phrases. Javanese is a distinct regional language, different from Indonesian. It has its own grammar, vocabulary, and script. Sugeng's notes were written in a mix of both languages. Some passages were decipherable, though odd. Others made no sense at all. One passage read, "Your problem is broken. Wherever you are, you build nests of your problems, all proven to be a problem. Corpses, hundreds of millions of corpses, split open by a carriage carried by sinners. All come from God, all return to God." On the same page, there were other scrawled words that investigators couldn't decipher at all. But one line, sitting plainly among all the chaos, was perfectly legible. Great Malang area, Malang City, East Java. Simply the name of the city, written clearly amid a sea of scrawling that made no sense. No one could explain why. Writing also covered the walls of the room. One sentence read, "Bad people will see when they reach the end of their life. Death, tormented by complications, dying miserably." The writing mixed religious phrases with fragmented, violent imagery in ways that reflected a deeply fractured internal world. Whatever battle Sugeng was fighting, the writing found in his room strongly suggested that he was dealing with an untreated mental illness. This crime did not occur in a single night of violence. What happened unfolded over the course of several days. On the evening of May 7th, 2019, Sugeng was near Marta Dinata Street where he spotted a woman he had never seen before. He approached her and started talking. The conversation was brief. He learned she had come to Malang from Maluku Islands, a remote archipelago in eastern Indonesia, roughly 1,500 miles from Malang, and that she was dealing with some kind of illness. However, the specifics were vague and never fully established. She carried no ID. Like Sugeng, she was believed to have no fixed address. They were 2 people living on the margins, both with no one who would immediately notice they were gone. As they talked, Sugeng began complimenting her hair, her smile, her appearance. In Indonesian culture, this kind of warmth isn't unusual. Praising someone is often just a form of friendliness, not flirting. The woman likely took it that way at first. But Sugeng's intentions were different. Things escalated, and he started making physical contact. A touch, then a hug, then more. The woman agreed to have sex with him in exchange for money, but Sugeng didn't have enough cash to reach her price. He offered her something else instead. A meal, rice, simple, inexpensive, but filling. To his surprise, she accepted. The 2 sat together in an open area and ate, talking about their lives, his existence on the streets, her illness, the backgrounds of 2 people who had found each other by chance. When the meal was finished, the woman smiled. To most people, a smile after a shared meal means nothing. To Sugeng, it was more. He took it as a sign of consent. Things between them became physical again in that corner of the street. Sugeng suggested they move to a more private location. They settled on Pasar Besar Malang, the Grand Market. They headed to the 2nd floor of a section of the building that had previously housed a Matahari department store. Once full of activity, the department store had shut down, leaving the space empty and abandoned. And it was where Sugeng slept. Once inside, the woman told him she was feeling sick. Her body was visibly swollen, and she had asked Sugeng earlier in the evening to take her to a doctor. And he didn't. Now so close to what he had been building toward all night, he refused to believe her. He decided to prove she was lying. What followed was violent. Sugeng forced himself on her. When he couldn't perform, he turned to other means of sexual contact, violently escalating to the point where he severely injured her. She lost consciousness from the shock and pain. And then, with her unconscious on the floor in front of him, Sugang did something especially bizarre. He found a large needle, the kind used for sewing thick leather soles onto shoes, and then some pen ink. Then, carefully, deliberately, he tattooed the soles of her feet. On one foot, he wrote the sentence about the Chomboran church. On the other, Sugang wrote his name, as if he were an artist signing his work. At around 1:30 a.m., he left. She was unconscious. Whether she was still alive at the point is something that would later become one of the most contested questions of the entire trial. Sugang would later claim she had already stopped breathing, that he checked her and found no signs of life. The prosecution would argue the opposite, and that question was never definitively resolved. He walked out of the market and disappeared into the dark. This is the part the original accounts often gloss over, but it's the part that defines what kind of crime this actually was. Sugang did not act in a single moment of blind rage. He left. He had time to think. And then he chose to return. He came back to the second floor of Pasar Besar in the early hours of May 8th, 2019, likely only a few hours after he had left. He found the woman still there, lying where he had left her, in an empty wing of a former department store. Whether she was still alive when he returned or had already died from her injuries was disputed at trial and was never conclusively proven either way. What is not disputed is what happened next. He killed her. He cut her throat with a pair of scissors. Blood spattered across his shirt and pooled across the floor beneath the stairs. He dragged her body to the market bathroom and dismembered her, cutting her into 6 pieces, removing her legs, her arms, and separated her head from her torso. Her head was wrapped in a black plastic bag. Her limbs were placed under the stairs, and her torso was left in the bathroom, in the open. He made no real effort to conceal her remains. By the morning of May 14th, 6 days later, the smell had begun to draw attention. The tattoo gave investigators their most significant lead. They had a name, and the sentence on her foot referencing the Chomboran church. Police canvassed each church in the Chomboran area, one by one. At one of them, a staff member recognized the name Sugang and pointed the police toward a rented room in the nearby Pulehan neighborhood. The room was largely empty. Sugang had long since moved on, but the writing on the walls and papers confirmed they had the right person. The following day, May 15th, a piece of clothing was recovered from the crime scene. Police brought in their K9 unit. The dogs were given the scent and led officers along a path that ended at Panchabuti Mortuary on Marta Dinata Street, roughly 1 kilometer from the market. The area was quiet. Very few people were around. But one of the officers spotted a man asleep on the ground. He looked ordinary, peaceful. Officers compared his face to the composite sketch they were carrying. It did resemble him, but the man seemed so oblivious, so undisturbed, that they hesitated. Then one officer did something simple. He called out the name, Sugang. The man looked up at them, and that was enough. Sugang Santoso was arrested. He was brought to the crime scene and questioned. But he didn't tell the truth straight away. His first story to investigators was that the woman was sick and had already been dead for 3 days when he found her. That he had simply mutilated a corpse, not killed anyone. He wasn't the murderer, he claimed. He was just someone who had stumbled upon a body. The police didn't buy it. The blood evidence told a different story entirely. Large pools of blood under the stairs and throughout the bathroom. And the blood splattered across the shirt they had found, which was still in their possession. The blood evidence was consistent with murder, not the mutilation of a body. Investigators also noted that Sugang himself had let slip details during questioning that only the killer would know. As the police psychiatrist would later state, there was a story he was trying to hide. Confronted with the physical evidence, Sugang eventually dropped the pretense and confessed to everything. When asked why he had killed her, Sugang stared blankly and said, "She couldn't satisfy me." He explained that his disappointment wasn't rooted in rejection. It was something he observed about her physical condition during the encounter that disturbed him. From there, he said, he felt she was useless to him. No ID was found on the victim, so in an attempt to identify her, the police released a sketch. She was a woman believed to be approximately 34 years old, slender, from the Maluku region, dealing with some kind of illness. But no one came forward to identify her, and investigators could not match her to any missing persons report. She was buried as Ms. X. Her real name was never discovered. Sugang was given a psychiatric examination on May 16, 2019, just 2 days after the body was found. It was concluded that Sugang was in a conscious and fully aware state when he committed the crime. The examination also found that he had strong tendencies toward violence, was prone to suppressing his emotions, and that this kind of suppressed rage had the potential to explode without warning, exactly as it appeared to have done. Experts who assessed him during the trial went further, characterizing him as an aggressive psychopath with indicators of schizophrenia and an apparent sexual pathology. Then came a detail that reframed what had previously been treated as rumor. Early accounts of the case described a violent incident involving his ex-girlfriend, but stated that it was unverified. Something people said about Sugang, but that had never been officially confirmed. The trial revealed the full truth. Sugang had been convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison in 1992 for cutting his girlfriend's tongue with a pair of scissors. It wasn't a rumor, it was a criminal record. This prior conviction, showing a history of violence, was entered into evidence by the prosecution. At trial, Sugang was charged under Articles 340 and 338 of the Indonesian Criminal Code, the equivalent of first-degree premeditated murder. As he could not afford counsel, he was represented by a team of 10 state-appointed lawyers. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained his innocence and gave evasive, inconsistent answers in his testimony, the same pattern the police psychiatrist had noted during interrogation. The defense argued, among other things, that Sugang was schizophrenic and therefore could not be held legally responsible. And they challenged the prosecution's evidence, stating that the official autopsy report concluded the body had been cut post-mortem. The defense said it was proof that Sugang had not killed the woman, but had only mutilated her corpse. The prosecution countered with the blood evidence. The volume and distribution of blood at the crime scene was consistent with that of a living person, not a dead body. And Sugang's own confession, combined with his attempt to wash away the blood, pointed unmistakably to a man who knew he had committed murder and was trying to hide it. The sentencing hearing itself was delayed 3 separate times because prosecutors weren't prepared to read their closing argument, a situation that frustrated the presiding judge, Dina Pilita Asmara, who at one point threatened to release Sugang from detention if the prosecution failed to meet the legal deadline for the conclusion of the trial. When the defense finally presented their closing argument, they called it the never-ending proof, a phrase that Sugang himself had uttered during a preliminary hearing, and which his legal team adopted as their central thesis. That the evidence against him was so perpetually inconclusive, it could never truly convict him. It didn't work. Any hope that his unstable mental state might work in his favor was undone during the crime reconstruction on June 18, 2019. where he reenacted 38 separate scenes across 2 different locations, attended by prosecutors, defense lawyers, and police. And during that process, Sugang admitted he had planned to dispose of the body parts outside the market entirely. That admission of deliberate intent sealed his legal accountability. On Wednesday, February 26, 2020, the Malang District Court sentenced Sugang to 20 years in prison, lighter than the life sentence prosecutors had requested. When speaking to the media afterward, Sugang smiled and expressed relief that he had only received 20 years. He filed an appeal to the High Court, arguing through his lawyer that he never killed the woman and couldn't have dismembered a body using only a pair of scissors. The appeal was rejected. It was then the Malang City Prosecutor's Office, unsatisfied with the 20-year sentence, that filed its own appeal to the Supreme Court, pushing for a harsher punishment. Sugang's legal team filed their own appeal simultaneously, still hoping for leniency. But Sugang's appeal for leniency was rejected. And on August 27, 2020, the Supreme Court sentenced Sugang Santoso to death by firing squad. As of the last available reporting, Sugang is being held at Loraquaro Maximum Security Prison in Malang. Even with the case legally closed, questions linger. The victim was never identified. Despite the public sketch, no one ever came forward. Maybe she had no one to notice she was gone. She was buried without a name, an anonymous woman whose story ended in an empty market, surrounded by strangers who never knew she was there. The exact meaning behind the sentence Sugang tattooed on her feet, the revelation I received from the Chumboran church with a family I met, was never explained. It may have been the fragmented expression of a deeply disturbed mind, or it may have meant something specific to him that he never fully articulated. No one knows. And at the center of it all is a detail that is easy to overlook, but impossible to dismiss once you see it. Sugang left that night. He walked away while she was still alive, and he had time to make a different choice, but he came back anyway. What do you make of this case? Do you think justice has been served, or should the case have been concluded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and that is all for today. Thanks for watching.